good moves available right here. One thing I want to say is if you and I knew the position at move 20 in all our games, you mentioned that would be a big advantage, right? I mean, I think if we knew 20 moves like this of every game and some idea of like what the resulting position is like, it really, I mean, you could see us drawing 70% of our games instead of losing so much. So I think it's huge. And I remember when I watched the game between Jeffrey and Wesley, I was thinking that Black was in huge trouble. If you didn't know this opening theory and you were just seeing this position, would you imagine that it's scary for Black here, this position?
Yes, if I don't know, if I just watch this game without knowing that the game has been played, I would be like, oh, whoa, what's going on? Rook g5 now wins a queen. Black has to play f6. This is such a bad move. It becomes a king. And then d5 is under check. I would be like this. But now knowing the game, know what's the Black's moves to, I think it's just okay to play with both sides.
So I remember being really, really impressed with how Wesley drew this game. F6 has just been played by Hikaru, by the way, just like Wesley played before, this crazy move, hanging the d5 pawn with check. So he's still following, they are still following that game up through king h8. And I remember being really excited, like, oh my goodness, Jeffrey is going to like win a game against Wesley, or has really good chances to win a game against Wesley. And I was terrified for Black. And when Wesley drew that game, I was so impressed. I was like, oh my goodness, he's so good. How can you draw like this? But the thing is, the first time you draw a game like this, yeah, it's amazing. You have to be so good, right? But if you know the first 25 moves, the difficulty level goes down for Hikaru here, right? Because number one, he knows there's a draw. That's helpful for finding the draw. If you know that the balance can be held, if you know some of the ideas from seeing the previous game, and if he has to find 2 or 3 hard moves in a single game, that's not going to be enough to get a mistake out of Hikaru. He will solve them. It'll look like he's a genius, but actually the difficulty level was just not high enough to really like push him. When he knows that much about the position and only has to solve a couple questions instead of 20 questions.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. David, we have now king h8, and in the game that has been played between Jeffrey and Wesley, rook f2 was a move there to avoid Black's move rook c2. So you don't want this rook to get activate and attack your h2 weakness. So rook f2 is the move maybe Wesley is now thinking to play. And after rook f2, he played himself rook to c1 and tried to trade another rook of white. Before we go to that line, we have very interesting suggestion in the comment section in the chat. Rook c6 move instead of f6. f6 looks the move that you weaken your king and drop the pawn. Rook c6 looks more natural. If you play rook g5, I will cover it. But I very quickly checked that with a computer, as everybody checks with a computer. I'll do that too. And after rook c6 here, white goes to rook e to f1. So here white has Black has some options, and Black has to be a bit careful. If you just make some moves here, I don't know, a6 or some waiting moves, you might fall for rook h5, rook f6 moves. You have to be just very careful. But there's a
queen
move.
Can never go here. She can't go here. I guess she could maybe go to g7 because then the rook can still block on g6.
Yeah, that's possibility. So instead of a6, it's just a move that we randomly play here. Rook e6 is Black's choice here to target the queen. And now what white can do is to give a check on g5. Black has to cover this check, and now to go rook h5. So you win a little bit of time here with this move. And after queen to g7, you can take d5 pawn. And in some of the computer lines, then f1 rook also gets somewhere on the 4th or 5th rank. And if you don't play accurate moves here, you can get a little bit worse position with black.
Oh, Wesley has played a different move than Jeffrey. Let's check out the live move. Well, before I switch to the live position, which people can also see in the view here below, Ketty, I'll just say this position, Ketty, that you just showed us is a scenario that's good for white, I think, right? Because the black pieces are still passive while white has recovered their pawn. The rook on g6 is not getting to c1 or c2, which was kind of a main defensive resource that Wesley showed in his game with black here. Against Jeffrey. So this position, white can keep the tension, bring the rook to f5, pressure f7, maybe advance the d pawn. This is still a lot of scariness for black in this kind of scenario here. So that was the choice of rook e6 in this position versus f6 as played by both Hikaru and Wesley previously. So check here, and in this position, instead of the fancier move rook f2 preventing rook c2, we've got just queen takes b7 played by Wesley, and we immediately have to ask ourselves, what about rook c2 for Hikaru here? Because that's presumably the move Wesley was trying to prevent in that other game.
Rook c2 is on the board.
Hikaru's played it pretty quickly. I would think if he were scared, whenever he gets scared in this game, if there ever comes a moment when he's scared, I would expect, a 15, 20 minute think on, the first key move he gets, because there's only going to be a couple of them. But he played rook c2 quickly. And did white have anything other than rook f2 here, or is this just kind of a forcing move?
You don't want to play f4. This is just weakens g3 pawn then, and queen d2 comes, and you can stop queen f2, queen h2. Queen h2 move right away. So rook f2 was pretty much forced. But
rook f2 is pretty much forced here.
Yeah, you don't really solve your king's problem. Now black can take this, and queen h2 can be captured by black.
Okay, so this doesn't look very scary for black to me. Oh, this is done. No. This is done. Dina, go do your interview.
Hurry up.
I'm sorry, queen g2. I mean, this is done. Wesley had no ammo left here, or what? Hikaru?
He goes forward, queen h5. He says, your king is weaker than mine, and you have d4 pawn, and I'm going for that.
That's incredible. Oh no, draw agreed. Okay, we got a little whiplash there. It was like, if you wanted to draw, you just play queen g2, right? It's a dead rook and pawn ending. But he played queen h5 and then offered a draw, just saying like, there's no danger in any move. It doesn't matter what I play. That's the way.
Yeah. But David, if he takes first queen on g2, king g2, and you will get this, you might get this rook on d1, and this rook will support the pawn, then king will come on f3, f4. Maybe he doesn't want this complication. He wanted draw. He made queen h5, and that's move 30. And according to the rules we have at the Grand Prix, you can offer a draw. And he knew that Wesley will not decline that draw. So
right.
Yeah, he went for this. I was so curious to see what was the better move than queen b7. Is obviously not the improvements of